I'm here with Charlie Cosmo Wilson, who has basically worked with everybody. AC/DC, Aerosmith, Scorpions, Iron Maiden, Van Halen, the Stones. I mean, everybody. White Snake, Judas Priest. I mean, the list goes on, and you could probably, fill some in for me. But let me know how you got into the industry. How did it all start for you?
Well, I mean, I think myself and like a lot of other guys on the road, we're all frustrated musicians. We all wanted to be rock stars. And I mean, I saw Kiss in 1976 and the show impressed me and I wanted to be a rock star. And I moved back to New York from Florida in 1979 and I started working. I had a friend who was working with a band in New York called Falconetti, and he said they needed a drum tech. And he said, "Do you want to come and work?" And I had no clue. But I said, yes. So I started, I did a gig, learned how to, there were drums. I mean, I played in a band, high school band, so you kind of know drums, stuff like that. So I learned really quickly on that. And I could play guitar. So I became a guitar tuner, backline tech. And I did that for a few years in New York. And then I moved back down to Florida. And I started working as a local stagehand and working the concerts at Lakeland Civic Center. And I pretty much gave everybody my number. And finally got a call to go on the road in 1986. I went out with the Cure as a crew guy. And, after that, I did a tour with Genesis, the Invisible Touch tour. And I did a bunch of different bands as a crew guy, from Barbara Mandrell to NXS to Crowded House. And then in 1989, I went out with the Rolling Stones as the crew chief. And then the LD left to go do Tina Turner. And I took over running lights for the Stones. And that was when I started doing which is pretty much what I've been doing ever since is being a lighting designer, lighting director, board operator. And that's how I got started.
Awesome. So it was really just kind of paying your dues as a local stagehand, and somebody finally noticed how hard you were working.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting. It seems like Kiss were, for many people, like the entry ground into wanting to get into rock and roll or stage design or lighting design. I mean, they were definitely groundbreaking. I guess that must have been like the Destroyer Rock and Roll Over tour.
Yep, that was it. Very good.
Wow, how cool. Yeah, I'm a huge Kiss fan. So
the show I saw, just the show I saw is the one where Ace Frehley got shocked.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, incredible. So you kind of knew, is that what made you want to get into playing music, or were you also captivated by the whole show and the theatrics? And
I'll tell you, I mean, it was my first concert. I mean, I played in a band, I was a guitar player, and I wanted to be, a rock star. And I saw Kiss, and, that cemented the deal with being a rock star. But I got to say, looking back, walking into the Lakeland Civic Center, which, at the time seemed like this huge arena. And I go back now and it's this little tiny arena. But I'll never forget the lighting rig hanging from the steel. That was impressive. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it before. And then before the show, they had guys climbing up ladders and they ran a spotlight, and that was impressive. And it's funny, that stuck with me. But at the time, I didn't think anything about lighting. I was just blown away about the whole thing. The band, the makeup, the volume, the whole package, the whole show. But looking back now, it obviously had an impression on me. Getting into lighting, I can tell you how I got into lighting, because it's not something I aspired to be. It's the way things worked out.
Yeah. So when you went out with The Cure, which was your first tour, what were you doing on that tour?
Well, I was on the lighting crew. I came out, essentially, just a little in a nutshell. The reason I ended up doing lighting so much is because at basically any kind of arena, the first thing you do is you unload the trucks and you push the boxes to the stage. Well, I hated pushing boxes to the stage, and I noticed the guys that went to work first were the lighting crew. They would say, and the crew chief would inevitably say, "I need two guys to bolt together truss or run four out or lift the dimmers." So as soon as I saw that they were getting ready to do that, I would jump on stages and start helping them put together the truss. So that's pretty much. And then I always got put on the lighting crew. And I just started handing my number out. And what happened on The Cure is they had 2 English crew guys who were in Canada and they didn't have a proper work visa. So they didn't make it to the States. So I got a call and they said, can you be in Chicago tomorrow? And I said, yes, of course. So I jumped on a plane the next morning and flew to Chicago and took over and was a lighting crew for the rest of that leg of that tour.
Wow. And so how did that end up into, I guess Patrick Woodruff was the lighting guy for the Stones.
Right.
On the Steel Wheels tour.
Right.
What was the connections that got you working that tour?
Well, I was working for a company called, the first company I worked for was called TTR. And they were actually housed in the same shop as Very Light and Showco in Dallas on Regal Row.
Cool.
Then Samuelson bought them out and we went to a bigger, different warehouse. And so I was doing different tours for Samuelson's. And then we got the Rolling Stones tour and I went out, there was 2 crew chiefs because we had 2 systems that leapfrogged. So I was the crew chief of one system, the red system, and Steve Nolan was the crew chief of the blue system. And so I did that for a few months. And as I said, then when we went to Japan, Sean Richardson, the LD, had to leave to do Tina Turner. But here's the thing. I was out front of house every night, at the show, making sure everything was all right. And Sean would get up. It was a long show. He would get up to go pee, basically. And he would let me jump on the console because I was running lights for opening acts and stuff like that. So he would let me jump on the console and run the lights for that one song or a couple of songs. And I think what happened is Patrick and Sean both saw talent in me and they saw that I could do it. So when we got to Japan, Patrick said, I want you to take over running the lights for the Stones. So I said, wow. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah. You've worked with a lot of huge artists, now, so it's probably doesn't really phase you, but that must be, that's basically as big as it gets right there.
Oh yeah. I still look back and it just amazes me that, they asked me to do the Stones. My first big tour was the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. So what's that like in terms of the scope of that show and the size of that show? Because had you done stadium shows before that, or was that your first stadium outing?
Well, I had done Genesis in 1986 and 87. We had done stadiums.
That was stadiums, okay.
In excess, we did. I was used to doing shows on that scale. That happened pretty quickly. I was jumped right in. But as far as running lights, I don't know. I just didn't think about it. I just jumped on the console and ran lights. I'd run lights for, as I said, opening acts and stuff. So I was used to it.
Yeah. So how did that work? Patrick, did he design the show in terms of the looks and everything?
Yes.
And then how was that implemented with what you and Sean are doing? Was Patrick on tour as well?
Yeah, Patrick was on tour most of the time. There was also Dave Hill was out on the Very Light console because we had the moving lights, we had the conventionals. And yeah, Patrick and Mark Fisher were the designers of the show, the stage. Mark Fisher mainly the stage, Patrick the lighting. I ran the conventional desk, which was the Selco Gold console, and Dave Hill ran the Very Lights. And so Patrick was there, kind of overseeing everything. But me, at that time, I was still loading stuff in, and then I would run the show, then I would do load out. It's as I said, they kind of groomed me to take over because Sean would have me run different songs at different times. And they knew I had timing, and that's the main thing. And seeing the show so many times and running the songs a few times, I picked it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, cool. Going back to Genesis, I think they were the ones that the Vera lights were basically almost designed for them. But that was maybe an earlier tour.
They had done it on an earlier tour. Yeah. What we used on the Invisible Touch was the Model 2s and 3s. The Model 1 was on, I think, the Mama tour.
Okay. Yeah. So did you design or did you just run the show for the Invisible Touch?
But I was simply on the lighting crew on that one. I didn't. That was in 86 and 87. I didn't start running lights until 1990 with the Stones. That was my first headline tour. Okay.
So then you then go do the Urban Jungle tour, which is the European version. And was that basically same kind of system design, just different staging, or was it a totally different? Looking at the pictures, it looks similar, but it looks like the facades on the side of the stage are different.
Yeah. Well, on the, we had the big gantries on the side, and the side, the size of that stage, we needed to leapfrog it because it was such a major stage. So for Europe, they decided they couldn't do that. It was too large. So what they did is we kept the basic center of the stage the same, with the pods.
Yeah.
But then the scrim, we replaced all the structure on the outside with scrims. And so it was a lot easier and quicker to get up and to reproduce from city to city.
And did you need to leapfrog that show as well, or was that just one?
That was, well, we leapfrogged. I mean, we had the stage itself. The stage itself, we had, I think, 3 or 4, and that's normally. Okay. And then they would dress it up with the scrims. The scrims you could hang in it, the day of the show. Yeah, we could travel with a package, a universal package that went from show to show. Whereas the steel wheel show was so large, there's no way you could get it up and up in place in a day. That's why we had to have two complete shows like that. Yeah.
Cool. So that then leads you into working with AC/DC, which was one of my first concerts as a kid. And I loved stage design. And actually, I grew up in Cleveland, so that was the Richfield Coliseum.
Right.
I would have my mom drive me down the morning of the shows, and they would let me just sit in the stands and watch the whole stage being put together. But that was a really great design. Can you share some stories about that? I think I read that was the first time that the band had incorporated moving lights, because I think AC/DC in the 80s were always known for just
the big parkans,
huge parkan, almost like at war with Van Halen for how many parkans they had in their system. Was that part of your decision to kind of start updating their rig?
No, that was Patrick's. I mean, I'm a parkan guy and still am. I obviously have to change with the times, but that particular tour was right on the heels of the Rolling Stones. Patrick asked me to do it, and we talked about the design. And by that time, the VL4, which is the fourth kind of very light, that had come out, so we used that one, and it was kind of a light that looked like a parkan. It was like a wash light. It was great. But we also incorporated the big pods we had on the Stones, a different way, but we had those big chunks of light.
I was going to ask you, because it looks similar to what was maybe a slightly smaller version of the Steel Wheels tour. What were in those? Were those parkans in there? Were just gels?
Yeah, they were big scrollers, and the original scrollers were small for a single parkan, but then they had these things called Mega Mags, So we used them on the Stones. We brought them to AC/DC, and that way we had these big blocks of pods with we could change the colors in them. So that's how that one went. We still had the good old conventional punchy rock, and we didn't have a lot of moving lights, but it was the first time. And you're right, the band didn't really want them, but we said we use them tastefully, and they were happy, and we did, and it was great. As you said, you saw the show; it was a great show.
Yeah, and then I guess it was the next summer, you went to Europe and Russia as part of that big Monsters of Rock tour. Mm-hmm. What was that like? And I know that show in Russia was like huge in terms of, size of audience, maybe the first time a show had been done of that size in Russia. Do you have any memories of that?
Well, I mean, that was the whole thing. It was the Monsters of Rock. So it was a traveling festival. It was AC/DC's Monsters of Rock, basically. We played Donington, which was incredible. Metallica was opening up for us for almost every show. We had Motley Crue for a few. We had Queensryche. We had the Black Crowes. And Moscow was kind of an add-on at the end of the tour. We were supposed to finish in Barcelona. But that was the year they had the coup, and the mayor of Moscow wanted to thank the people, and he asked AC/DC if they'd bring the concert there. So that was an incredible event. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, we flew into Moscow the dead of night, and landed, and it was almost surreal. especially for me growing up during the Cold War, here I am I'm at Red Square at 6 o'clock in the morning, watching the changing of the guard on Lenin's tomb. I mean, it was surreal. We went out to this big airfield and they brought everything in, including food, because they didn't have a lot of food in Russia at the time. And it was a spectacle. It was an Air Force base, so there was helicopters flying, and they were giving us flights in helicopters, and some of the crew were jumping out in Russian parachutes, and I thought they were out of their mind. But the entire thing was incredible. It really was mind-boggling that we were in Russia with this, and they ended up saying that there was about 1.6 million people there. And I went up in a helicopter and I took pictures and video, and I look back and go, man, it was incredible. And that show was really cool because Pantera opened up, and I didn't know who they were, and I thought they were a Russian band. They said, no, they're from Texas. And, I've since became very good friends with those guys and everything. But that was, first time I saw Pantera, and they were incredible. And
yeah, so good. Yeah. So how did you end up working with Pantera at all? Or you just?
No, I did some Ozfest and stuff. I mean, I just got to know the guys, Sonny Satterfield, their LD's a good friend of mine. And Grady, all the guys in the band, and touring with them with Ozzy or Black Sabbath, you become really good friends. And they invited me every night in the dressing room to do a black tooth before the show.
Yeah, nice.
A little shot, like a little tradition. So I was honored that they did that. And I became really good friends with Dime. And I miss those guys a lot.
Yeah.
So they were good. They were a great bunch. Vinnie Paul, awesome, really good.
Yeah, fantastic band. I got to see them a lot after that. Were there any issues with the stage and lighting setup in Russia? I mean, I guess there must have been local help to put that together. Were there issues you remember, and how was everything working as it should? Were there power issues?
Well, I mean, we brought everything. I mean, we were traveling anyway. They just had to. Most of it. The interesting thing in Barcelona is they flew the Antonovs, the 124s in, and we loaded them with gear. And I think we loaded two airplanes full of gear, and then they sent 2 airplanes with 4 trucks in them each. So we had basically our own stage. We had all our gear, all our lights. So the only thing that was supplied by the Russians was the labor. And since they didn't really have a labor force, they were all soldiers. They were all military soldiers. And, they didn't know what they were doing, but they all worked hard and they were excited to be there. So it was interesting.
Yeah, cool. So after that tour wraps up, what's next for you?
Well, AC/DC finished in 1991. And then in 92, I did the Freddie Mercury AIDS benefit show, which was another big stadium show.
Yeah.
I mean, it was huge, it was tremendous. And we did that, I think, in April of 92. And then I went out with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We did another Patrick. You see, me and Patrick worked a lot then. We did he did the overall design for the Freddie Mercury AIDS benefit show. And then Emerson, Lake and Palmer, he did the design for that. And we took that out. That was a good year tour into 93. And then that led into Rod Stewart. I did Rod Stewart from 93 into 94. And then I went out with David Lee Roth. I mean, it was just back-to-back tours. It was, just nonstop. It was incredibly great. And then 95, I started working with Foreigner. And in 96, I was back with AC/DC again.
And that was Ball Breaker. Ball Breaker. And then it was Stiff Upper Lip after that. Yep. So was Patrick still doing the design of those?
Still doing it and still is.
He still does it. So you're kind of his right-hand man in terms of running that.
Well, exactly. We sit down and we come up with a concept and we design it together, and we come up with really good ideas. We talk to the band like you do on anything. And they trust Patrick and I trust Patrick and he trusts me to run it, we have a great relationship with that. I love working with Patrick. And he loves working with me in that sense. I mean, it's just like whenever we start a new tour, it's like we left off in the last. We always call it seamless. It's like there was no time pass. So we just went from one show to the next.
That's great. So maybe you can share your process of, when AC/DC comes to you and they say, hey, we're going out, put us together something. How does it usually work? Do they give you a budget that you guys work with? Or do you just basically put together your dream kind of system and then they're fine with it? Walk me through kind of your process of actually putting it together.
Well, I mean, you always have they like you to keep to a budget, and I mean, I think managers come up with budgets from previous tours. They know how much a certain percentage. I mean, it's not so much a money thing. I think it's more of a percentage. They have a percentage for lights, a percentage for sound, a percentage for the stage, so on and so forth. So they'll always have a budget. And a band like AC/DC has a large budget because they want a big over-the-top show. Generally, when AC/DC, I mean, the bands are different, but as far as AC/DC goes out, they come up with a concept for the album. I mean, like, for instance, Razor's Edge, the song was Thunderstruck. So the first thing we wanted to do was the beginning of the show was the song Thunderstruck, and we had lightning, the sounds of thunder and stuff. So we had tons of strobes in the audience to make it look like lightning. So that was the original concept of that. And Ball Breaker, the ball breaker was actually a girl, but if you think what a ball breaker is in real life, it's a big crane with a ball on it. And that's where we came up with the concept of the wall, and the ball knocked the wall down to start the show. And Stiff Upper Lip had the statue of Angus on the cover. Well, we made the big 35-foot statue. So there's always an idea that we start with, like, how do we build a 35-foot statue? The Black Ice Tour, the big song was, Runaway Train, Rock and Roll Train. So they said, well, let's do a big, huge AC/DC train as the centerpiece. I mean, even the last tour, we didn't really have a centerpiece. We had a big stage set, but it started out with the band coming, landing on the moon. And I don't know if you saw the last tour, but so that's how it starts, is the concept of what we're going to do. Then we build around that idea. And the lighting, the lighting, we always want it to look big and bright. And, it's like you said, I mean, it's always been big park hands, big chunky looks and stuff like that. So we try to accomplish that even using moving lights, because it's still light coming out, but we try to get really big, bright moving lights. So we still have the big chunky looks, but that's how it starts. And the nice thing about AC/DC is they kind of give Patrick artistic license to do, what he wants. And he comes up with some great and beautiful designs, and we'll sit down at a table and draw, we do stuff on the back of napkins still, but something like that. We draw big drawings and we just make notes and stuff like that. And then we come up with the like the Stones is like that. We figured out where certain lights were going to go on that big, huge steel wheels show, but that's the same kind of thing.
So in terms of the stage design, did Mark Fisher or Tate Towers do the AC/DC stages throughout the 90s?
Yeah, back then. I mean, before he died, I mean, the last tour, he'd already passed away, but yeah, he was intricately involved in doing the stage designs.
So how does that work with you doing the lighting design? Is it kind of, are you guys in touch with each other as the stage is being designed, and it's kind of working around, whatever the stage is going to be? Obviously, it sounds like you guys came up with some staging concepts as well with those set pieces. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, obviously we want to, there's two things. We want to light it. So we want to pick the lights, like the train. We decided how to light the train. There's so many. The nice thing about lights is you can pretty much do anything you want. I mean, I have the concepts of how I do lights to make sure the stage is lit, the band members are lit. But when it comes to the set, you have to take two things into consideration: what you're lighting and where are you going to put those lights to light. Because you don't always have the perfect place. Might be in the middle of the stage, or you don't want, sometimes you don't mind incorporating the lights in the show and you can see the lights, but sometimes you don't want them in the way. So that's the thing with Mark Fisher, is he would take that in consideration. So he would design a set where you could actually build the lights into the set, so they look part of it. It didn't look like it was just tacked on later. So then that's the thing about working with Patrick, and a show, especially shows like that, is the lights become part of the show instead of added on. Let's put this light here, let's put that light there. It looks better when you design it into the set.
Yeah. So with AC/DC, the past couple of tours, they've basically moved to stadiums primarily.
Right.
Has that affected how you guys decide to do anything? I mean, do you figure that, with the shows that start during the daytime, does that affect your your choices of how you're lighting?
Well, I mean, yes and no, because you still have a lot of shows that are in the dark. And I'll tell you how I get around that. I mean, first of all, like you said, every other tour we started in arenas and then advanced to stadiums. This last tour, we started in stadiums for the first time. And the difference is when you start in arenas, you don't really think about stadiums. And then when you go to stadiums, you think about expanding the set. And what I generally have is, like I said before, you end up tacking stuff on. And that's the start. But starting in stadiums, you start with the design, the full design in the beginning. And that was the beauty about the last tours. We knew we were doing stadiums from the get-go. So the whole set was designed. And I can tell you the difference. Like the Black Ice tour, we had the train. That was the centerpiece. So, but now that we're doing the whole stadium from the beginning, then all of a sudden you have all this structure on the outside you want to do. So you don't have as much of a centerpiece as the big picture. So it was great starting in stadiums with everything purposely built for a stadium show, as opposed to adding on to it later. I mean, as far as doing the lights, and you're right. I mean, you do Scandinavia. I mean, even England in the summer, sun doesn't set till 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Normally what I do, the first song I do in no color. I don't use any colors. I use white, just because I want people to, they want to see the band, So I mean, I'll use colors sometimes, but I want to see the band. Now, they want to see the band. But when we go in a show like where it's going to be daylight, I have a second set of cues where everything's in white or lighter colors. So it's not because you're not going to see it. I'm trying to light the band so they stick out. They stand out more. We darken the stage as much as we can with covers and stuff like that and sidewalls. But yeah, I mean, I'll do 3 or 4 or 5 songs in white. And I'll tell you, there's a little magical thing that when you go to color after it gets dark, people don't notice the sun's gone. All of a sudden it's color. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's suddenly color. And I love that. People go, wow, it's just a great magical effect.
Yeah, that's great. Running the show, how much of it is totally pre-programmed and how much do you improvise, or are you kind of still running the board and hitting cues with your fingers, or so how has that changed over the years? Or are you kind of running it in like an old school way?
I still run it in an old school way. What's changed over the years is the consoles have given me the ability to write or to program complicated looks. In other words, in the old days, you had 2 scenes. You had red and lavender, and the other scene was green and yellow, and you could switch between them, and then you could set up the scenes. And then as consoles started getting better, more complicated, you could make a bunch of different scenes and a bunch of different scenes. But with now the consoles, I mean, I can run 500 moving lights. I can run 1,000 moving lights. But I still run the show manually because bands that I work for, like AC/DC and like Aerosmith, they play manually. There's no time code or click track. I mean, even you can still do that, but running it manually, that human factor in there makes it really good. And that way I can, I don't have to follow exactly a program. I mean, I still program the songs out, like chorus and verse and guitar solo. Yeah. But I run them and I manually, and I'm hitting bumps and audience lights and ACLs, and it's still running it manually is the joy that I have running, operating when I work for these bands. Yeah,
that's great. So you mentioned Aerosmith. You've worked with Aerosmith. When did you start working with them? And
about 10 years ago.
Cool. And what tour was that? I'm wondering if I happen to see that one.
That was the first tour I did with them. It was what was the name of the album? Wow, I can't remember. The Global Warming Tour.
Okay.
And that was in, I think 2011 or 12 or so.
Okay. And then you were doing the Deuces Wild Vegas.
Yep. Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
Is that going to continue?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They still. I think they have 2 more runs at least to do there. They wanted them to do 2 more. We actually had a run that was going to be in May of 2020 and then November of 2020, and we were doing Europe in between. But obviously with COVID, it went away. But they're talking about doing it. I mean, the park still wants them to come back, and the band want to do it. It's,
So did you design that show?
No, that was designed by think about this for a minute. It was designed by Fireplay overall.
Okay.
Which is the company that does that. And I mean, I had input in there, but that was, since it was Vegas, they wanted more. There's so much on that show between video, the sound. Nick Whitehouse, was a designer. Nick Whitehouse and Fireplay. He was the overall designer, but I had input. We talked. Stephen Douglas came in and programmed with us, and then after we got going, I worked on it a lot more and fine tuned it down. But yeah, that's a great show to run. That's a lot of fun. Nick Whitehouse did a great job. His programming skill is unbelievable. Have you gotten into designing shows from start to finish?
Yeah. And so what are some of your maybe designs that have stood out over the years that you're proud of?
Well, I did a lot of the 10 years I was at the Scorpions, I did a lot of designs for them. Aerosmith, I've designed pretty much everything except the Vegas run. David Lee Roth, as far as my own designs, all the Foreigner stuff I've done different designs over the years. But AC/DC, like I said, a lot of stuff I do, co-design, with Patrick and other designers. Meatloaf, I did a tour with Meatloaf. I did a tour with Motley Crue. I did 2 tours with Motley Crue back when it's when
John Corabi.
No, well, it was before. It was when Tommy came back and Vince Neil came back.
Oh, cool.
And it was the greatest hits tour with 1998, 1999. I did both those tours and designed both those shows. And those were more difficult because here's a band that's used to playing arenas and we were playing theaters. So they said, make us look like we're in arenas. And I just jammed as many park hands in theaters as I could. And it was a great show.
In terms of kind of the band's feedback or creative input, who stands out to you over the years where they're more involved and they have ideas or they have feedback once they've seen the show?
Well, I mean, it's funny, lots of bands. I mean, I've done some one-off stuff, and there's bands like for instance, when I did the Freddie Mercury show, I was doing programming in a studio, and Brian May came and sat and spent the entire night with me.
Wow.
And that was fantastic. And he had input, and he kind of let me do what I wanted to do, but I wanted his input. He was there. I programmed with Tom Horton on a Godsmack tour, and they had input on the lighting and stuff. Some bands have more input than others. My bands, a lot of them hire me just because they don't want to worry about lights, and they know I'm going to come in and do a great job. I mean, they all have inputs and ideas. The Scorpions, AC/DC even have certain things they want. Or they'll come up with an idea of something they want to see. Even Aerosmith, Steven Tyler is he likes being involved in every creative part of the show. But he still gives me artistic license. We'll sit down and talk, and he loves it when I come up with ideas. We brainstorm and stuff, and he'll say, I'll be here and you can do this with the lights. And I go, that's a great idea, but most of the bands I work for pretty much let me do what I want, and that makes you feel good. I mean, I always ask, but I'm fortunate that I'm very fortunate that they give me artistic license like that.
That's great. Looking back on all these shows and artists and tours that you have worked with, we talked about Steel Wheels and AC/DC in Russia, but what are some personal highlights or accomplishments that you're proud of or that stand out to you?
Well, there's different tours for different reasons. Some tours are very difficult and to get through them. I'll tell you, one of my favorite bands, I worked with Crowded House back in 1989. And I was on the crew and stuff, but they were such a great band. And we traveled across Canada in February and March. The worst time of year to be up there, but they were such a joy to work with and such great musicians. That's one of my favorite tours. Every AC/DC tour is great. It's like family.
Yeah.
to me. Foreigner, I worked for a very long time. And, same kind of thing. We went through difficult times and slogged through a lot of hard, long hours, overnight flights and stuff. It's that kind of thing. I mean, there's just some shows that are magical. I mean, others that just dotted. I mean, like on the Rolling Stones, we were in Berlin in 1990. And during you can't always get what you want. I turn the audience lights on and I look around me and I see all these people singing and swaying and smiling. And I thought, what a great job I have to be part of something that brings so much joy and happiness to people. And that's pretty much every show's like that. In 2019, one of my favorite bands of all time is Judas Priest. And in 2019, I got asked to take over the lighting for Tom Horton because he was leaving to do Green Day. And that was a dream come true for me. And talk about a great bunch of guys to work with, from the band on down to the crew, every single person on that. And it was one thing I'm very fortunate is I get to work with bands of music I like. And I guess on top of that, I get to work with the bands of music I love. It's almost like if you could pick a band to work with, and that's pretty much my, the list of all the bands I've worked with. I've been so fortunate.
Yeah. You've worked with Iron Maiden. What did you do with Iron Maiden?
Well, in 2005, they were on the Ozfest opening it for Black Sabbath. And Martin Brennan, the LD, had another job to do. So he asked me to do it. So I came in and took over the lights. And that was a great, interesting tour. It was an interesting spot because we were the opening act, especially for a band like Iron Maiden, who was a headliner. But we were on the Ozfest, or not. It was the Ozfest, and Black Sabbath was closing the show.
Yeah,
so that was an interesting, run, and I enjoyed it. The guys were great, and I got along really well with all the band. And it's another band I love, and I was fortunate to get to do lights for.
And you had worked with Black Sabbath when they did their kind of big reunion in the late 90s. Yeah, that was a great tour. I think I saw that in San Jose.
That was a great tour, and working with a classic band like that. It's another band, and Pantera opened up, so I mean it was double. I mean here was Pantera and Black Sabbath, and you talk about Black Sabbath being legends. Obviously Ozzy and. But Tony and Geezer and Bill, and Vinny Appice was there as a backup drummer. I go way back with Vinny. So that was great. Just working with your idols is an amazing part of this business.
Yeah. That tour, actually, I really love the look of that tour, thinking back on it. Were there chandeliers or almost like Gothic?
Yeah, and we had the flames. We had the big surround of the screen, and that's another Patrick Woodruff design as well.
Yeah, that's great. So where the industry is right now, and rock music isn't as dominant now as it was. You've got a lot of like these huge productions for EDM festivals, and a lot of hip hop artists are the ones that are. Pop and hip hop artists are filling arenas right now. How do you see the difference in like the design aspect and how the shows are run? I mean, now looking at some of these ED festivals, everything's just so fast and lasers shooting all the time. Where like the rock shows, they're just more robust. It's not as like 100. It's like just not as heavy. You're almost going to get a seizure by watching some of these shows. Right. They're just so intense. What's your take on that, and where the industry's heading, and like young lighting designers, and kind of how things are different for them in terms of, the aesthetic?
Well, I mean, as far as the music, as long as the lights suit the music, and you're right, the EDM, the big strobe flash, in your face stuff works with EDM. Rock and roll. And here's the thing I'll talk about with rock and roll, the incandescent lights, the typical old park hand lights. I mean, everything's LED now, and I like LED. But there's, like for instance, there's a thing that's called when you on a light, it's called the attack and the decay.
Yeah.
And what that happens when you turn a light on, you know, a regular, like a big 1,000-watt power can, it takes a split second for it to come to full brightness. And when you turn off the light, it fades out. I mean, when you turn it off, it still has a decay. This LED light is on and off. I mean, you can build a decay in it, but LED lights, their makeup, you can't dim them all the way down because the way the LED works. Yeah. So you can't emulate an incandescent light. And what I'll say about how it works so well with rock and roll is a guitar has a sustain on it. The drum, you hit a drum and it has a ring on it. So that matches the lighting, the attack and the, you can say that about a drum. You hit a drum, there's an attack and a decay. You hit a guitar, there's an attack and a decay. So it matched. So that's the way LEDs actually match a lot of the EDM stuff. You know, there's not as much of an attack and a decay. It's just, you know, it's on and off and stuff like that. So it does match. So I think you have the right light for the right music. And as far as the LEDs, some of these guys blow my mind. I mean, it's like people when they talk about time-coded shows, you know, where everything is pre-programmed. I mean, that's not what I like to do. I like to run it live. But the thing is, I see these guys program these shows and the amount of time and detail and effort that goes into every single cue they write. Yeah. That's the whole thing. I mean, I don't fault them at all. You know, it's not my cup of tea. They're running the show. But when I watch the programs, it's unbelievable, the detail you can put in like that.
And I mean, at that point, you know, there's actually probably not that much live that's happening, right? If they've pre-programmed a track to a DJ set, it's all time code. They're just hit and play, and it's just kind of running.
Well,
right?
I mean, there's the two parts of it. I mean, you'll take a band like, I mean, say somebody like Beyonce or, you know, a modern band who does have a full stage of musicians and who are actually singing and not lip syncing. Not that I have a problem with that either, but they're on time code and the drummer has it in his ears and it's exactly as it should be. You can still pre-program that show. It just doesn't allow you to go off. Yeah. You know, at the band as well. So, but then you have the stuff like where it's like a DJ just playing music. And I'll tell you how I feel personally about this. And I got nothing against DJs or anything like that. But when there's a human being on a stage in front of you, singing, even if it's amplified through a microphone, I mean, it's kind of a spiritual thing for me, but there's a singer singing, there's a guy playing a guitar, his fingers are, you know, touching the strings, a bass player, keyboard, drummer, they're putting this humanity, this human thing into it. When they sing, it's their voice actually vibrating the air. And I think there's a human connection there between the audience and the band member that you can't get when somebody's lip syncing or when there's a DJ. You still enjoy the music. I mean, I play my stereo line at home and I love it. But when somebody's singing, the only person singing in front of you can move you to tears. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I don't think that'll ever go away, but you can't go to an EDM show and have that same kind of feeling.
Yeah. So that brings up a question for me with you actually, you know, doing a lot of these shows live. It's almost like you're like this fifth or sixth member of the band that's kind of in the same groove as them. Do you find yourself sometimes just getting you're just in the zone, lost in the music, and you're just kind of riding it with the band? Big time. You know, and that's the beauty about running shows like I run it. That happens a lot because they're up there playing that way, you know, especially Aerosmith. You know, people say Aerosmith is a sloppy band. They're just, that's how they play. Yeah. They're just playing out of their soul. You know, and I can run lights like that. And exactly. No, I mean, I feel, you know, I got to say, I mean, it's every night's a great night when I'm running lights for bands, but there's a few times over the years, over my 40 some years or, you know, 40 years of running lights for bands. There's only a few nights where you just connected. It was almost like you were disconnected from your body. It was just the band, the crowd, the whole, I mean, I can tell you one night, there was a night that AC/DC played in Oslo, Norway. Just something about that night it was everybody bonded over the music. It was incredible. Wow. You know? Well, can you share some other nights that stand out?
Well, it's, you know, I had a great night on the last tour with AC/DC in Madison Square Garden. Or, you know, over the years, it's you either have a really good show or a really bad show in places like that because the expectation, the stress, you know, and it can be difficult, but sometimes everything comes together. Like I said, the Rolling Stones that night in Berlin, we did the last show we did on that tour was in Wembley Stadium, and that was a magical night. It's I can remember a night with a band called D.L. Byron. We were playing My Father's Place in Long Island in 1979. And it was one of those, the band, it was great. I mean, I was a drum tech at that point, but I still remember that night because it was just that kind of magic.
Wow.
It's great.
So that brings me to the question about who's inspiring you, or who's inspired you along your road of doing this, in terms of seeing a show being like, wow, that's amazing, I'm going to take a little something from that. Are there any particular, designers or tours that you've seen that have been, inspiring, or anybody that's, been like a big mentor to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, as far as just general shows, watching shows and remembering things you'd seen. I think I learned a lot from when I became a stagehand and I was running Spotlight. There was a lot of LDs that I learned to run Spotlight from listening to them call Spotlight, and that in turn taught me to call Spotlight on my own. But Faye McMahon was Def Leppard's LD. Paul Dexter was Johnny James Dio's LD. Dave Davidian was a big influence on me. Mark Brickman.
That's funny because I've spoken as part of this. I've spoken to both Faye and David, and that's something that they both mention. It's definitely an art, Yeah, it seems like.
Roy Bennett is another one. I mean, as a laundry list of LDs, especially from the 70s and 80s, from the shows that I was fortunate to work as a stagehand or as a spotlight operator, especially as a spotlight operator, because you're listening to them and you're watching the show. Howard Ungerleider, I did Rush so many times, and then I did Rod Stewart with Howard Ungerleider. All these guys that I kind of idolized then as LDs, I've ended up becoming friends with, like Roy, Dave Davidian. It's amazing now that I'm in the same category as them, even.
Yeah.
So that's who I learned from is from everything from calling spots to lighting cues and color selection and so on and so forth.
Have you heard that recording of the it's like a Pink Floyd show from like 1972? Yeah. So that's funny.
Fantastic.
Have you had any experience?
Oh my God. Like that? I have more times than not to put it that way.
Yeah. So what does the future hold for you? You have your own company, and can you tell me a little bit about that? And obviously, I've had my own company for a while, and it basically I do lighting design and stuff like that. I do lots of different things with it, but I was asked to work for a company. I'm in St. Louis right now. It's a company called Gateway, and the whole name is Gateway Studios and Production Services. And what Gateway is doing is they're building a big production rehearsal facility here in St. Louis. It's 4 big sound stages. I mean, huge sound stages. Wow.
It's got a big office building to run the sound stage. It's got they have the ability to basically take an any size tour, from a stadium tour to a club tour. They're going to have a big we're going to have a big entertainment complex with a bowling alley, a stage, a restaurant, a lounge, but it's only going to be open to the people at the studio. They're going to build a 168-room hotel. And it's basically, we're calling it a campus. And what it's going to be is not only is it going to be for like bands rehearsing, it's going to be for corporate events. You could come and do a corporate. They have a big open atrium in the middle of it. They have one of the sound stages is made specifically for film and television. Wow. Because it has a smaller office building next to it, because that kind of production, you need many offices for the directors and the producers and everybody and the casting and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they're breaking ground about now. And we did a virtual groundbreaking last month, but it's supposed to be finished in 2022 and in the spring of 2022. 2023. Let's get that wrong. In the spring of 2023. And in the meantime, we're building the lighting, sound, and video and rigging part of it. So they brought me in for two reasons. Number one, with the studio, they want me to be a consultant. They want input. So because we're building, first of all, a previs suites, where you can come and pre-visual, program your show. But they also want my input on the studios and everything, because they want to know what people like me, other LDs, what they want when they come in. They want a laundry wish list of what you would want. They want people to come in and want to be there and enjoy being there and have everything that they need. And, from creature comforts to the technical things they need to put their shows up and to program. But for now, I'm here building the lighting shop. We bought a bunch of lighting equipment. We've got 2 tours out right now. We have Hollow Notes out right now and Black Pumas. And the nice thing is I moved temporarily to St. Louis, but when the tours go out, they want me to continue to tour, because the most important thing about Gateway is that everybody who works here has been on the road or has knowledge of being on the road, because that way, it's the whole thing is that this place is built by road crew. And it's been built by road crew and is being run by road crew and managed by road crew. That way we know what they need on the road. So I came in and I've been here for 3 months now. I've set up shop. I've hired crew to run the shop, and I've hired the crew for the tours. And so that's what I'm doing now. I mean, I'm going to New York next week to do the September 11th lights. The tribute light they call it. Wow. I do that. So I'm going to go do that.
Cool.
AC/DC, Aerosmith. I'm hoping they're going to go out next year. I mean, Aerosmith has been talking about it. AC/DC has to wait until the world is open, because they're going to do a full world tour. I mean, Aerosmith can tour the U.S. But AC/DC needs to tour the world, and then they need to tour Australia, and Australia is essentially closed right now.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, I'm doing this, and it's great. I feel honored that they asked me to do this, and I'm just I'm doing a show here and there with smaller bands and stuff to keep my chops up. And so
that sounds great. It sounds like that's kind of a first of its kind. There isn't really a multi-purpose facility like that, because usually
in Lititz, Pennsylvania, Claire or Tate Towers and Claire Brothers have built a facility there called Rock Lititz, and it's just one single studio. So it was kind of the idea of doing that is what they wanted to do here. And I foresee them doing more in the future, different companies. Rock Lititz is already building a second studio out there. And the thing is that I don't think there'll be competition. I think there's so much work, especially in the movie industry, that everybody will be busy. I think there'll be 6 studios in the next couple of years, and there won't be enough. I mean, 6 sound stages, and that won't be enough.
Yeah.
I think we'll be busy all the time.
That's great. Do you want to keep going out on the road for many years? Or are you kind of starting to feel like you're getting over it a little bit?
Well, no, I mean, first of all, I love traveling. I love touring. I love running lights for live shows. I mean, there's nothing to replace it. I love working at the studio right now. We'll see what the future holds for it. But, I don't want to tour like I used to, where we do 5 or 6 shows in a row and it's a grind and on the bus. And, I like AC/DC and Aerosmith. We do 2 shows a week. It's a much more relaxing tour, much more, we still work hard and everything, but it's not like the old days. I had a year and a half at home pretty much. And I enjoyed being at home. I'm married. I got my wife. I don't have any children or anything. So, but I still miss the road, and how long will I be on the road? As long as they'll have me.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like Charlie Watts just died. The bands I work for are literally dying. So I don't know if anybody's going to come and replace them. So the big tour is going to go away. I mean, you still have bands like Beyonce and, you still have big, huge tours out. I think Green Day is doing a huge tour right now. So there's still going to be big tours, and I think a lot of bands will go, we want someone like Cosmo because of, his history. And I'm not an old man or anything, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. And, I'm still hoping for another tour of the AC/DC. So.
Yeah, me too. That'd be great. So just to wrap things up, kind of something that I try to ask everybody is, what can you name in terms of, in your field, some of the biggest groundbreaking advances in terms of lights or the boards or programs that have really made the biggest influence on your career and made things easier?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the early days of rock and roll in the 70s, I think the one thing that everybody kind of forgets that really, really got rock and roll going is chain hoists, motors, the stuff that lifts trusses up in the air. I mean, what a great, it's been around so long, nobody thinks about it, but you get to hang these big, huge shows using these motors, these hoists, and so, but as far as, obviously as lighting wise, we had, the par cans and the ACLs and stuff like that. And there was the moving light, the intelligent light, as they call it. That was a major big thing. And, that was groundbreaking. And as I said about consoles, you had a console that had 2 scenes, and you had a console that you could program multiple scenes. But I think lighting wise, moving lights coming in, giving you the ability to move and change color and all the things they do. But I think that's kind of it's kind of stopped now because the moving light, they kind of do all they can do. But as far as consoles, what I found, I think consoles is the biggest thing because it now allows me to control more lights and do more crazy things with lights. So when you look at an EDM show, you could never do an EDM show 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You could strobe all the lights all the time, but when you look at Brian Hartley and the Trans-Siberian Orchestra and look what he does, he could have never done that without the console. Talk about a guy that has really utilized both the moving lights and the ability, both of them to their extreme. Something like that is fantastic. So I think it's a combination of the moving lights and the ability to control them. So many of them. I could have never thought about controlling 500 lights 10 years ago, 15 years ago. By myself, and now I can, and not only that, I can program a whole show in a few hours if I need.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, wow. So that's what I think is the biggest thing with as far as the industry, this technical lighting part of the industry is that. Yeah.
Just curious, when did you totally phase out par cans, say with AC/DC, or do they still have some?
No, I'll tell you a little story. So. AC/DC, we phased them out. I think probably in the Black Ice tour we went with all, but I had one. We had some par cans scattered around the stage, and we ended up not using them. So I had one par can, and I had it at front of house with me, and I still own that par can. So I always take one par can on every tour. But the way I'll tell you when it really happened, it was with Aerosmith. I was in South America, and probably 2015 or 14 or 15. And their par cans were a mess back when the heyday. And by that time, it's a disaster. I mean, the bulbs would blow up. They didn't work. Instead of having a multi-cable plugging in 6 lights, they plugged in single lights. It was this time-consuming, painful process. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't. Even in the U.S., I was using par cans. It was still painful. So I decided to find out the best replacement for a par can, which is one of those LED pars. I mean, there's several now. There's an X4. I'm not going to go into the names, but so what I did though is I designed a lighting rig using the configuration of par cans, but I used the moving light equivalent. So it still looked like a par can show, but it had the updated technology. And and I started doing that in 2017. But I still carry one par can.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So as some parting advice to say young people that want to break into the industry and do what you want to do, what do you suggest doing?
Well, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of schools and stuff. I mean, any kind of, especially in high school, there's always a theater department. You go work in the technical department, lighting, sound, video. I mean, they have really good ones now. Even if it's not, even if they don't necessarily have a class for it, they need people to do it. And that's, go to a club, go to your local theater. I always say, go get, real world experience, even if you're doing it for free. Run a spotlight in a bar. I mean, obviously you can if you're too young, but show interest, go to a theater, go to that's one thing, go to Full Sail. That's fine, but it costs money, but there's still nothing like real world experience. And the other thing I like telling younger people is never say no.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I never said no when I was, you know, like the guy asked me to do a drum check. I didn't know anything about drum, but I said yes. And then he said, can you tune a guitar? I said yes. I mean, and the beauty kids have now is YouTube. You want to learn something, you can go to, I didn't have YouTube. I had to ask somebody, how do you tune a guitar?
Yeah.
You know, but that's the thing. I think the main thing is real world experience. There's nothing like it. And that passion, you got to have the passion for it. You know, because people, when you ask somebody, can I come and work on the lights? If they see you have a passion, they'll go, come on, kid, I'll show you something. If they think you're doing it for another reason, they'll be like, go home. You know what I mean? So you got to have that passion for it. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, I don't know if there's anything that you want to, any final closing thoughts, but I really appreciate the time you've given me. And I hope that things get better and up and running for everybody. You know, I think everybody needs live music, and, you know, we need to get these tours back out on the road, hopefully next year.
Well, I mean, I agree, and I think it will happen. And I think the one thing the pandemic has done is made people realize how important live events and live music are. You know, I mean, when I was at home, I went to my local bar kind of probably a year ago when the pandemic was kind of dropping down a little bit. And I saw it was two guys playing. It was a guy, they were playing acoustic guitar. And it was just so great to see a live band. You see live music. It just filled my soul. And that's what people miss. They miss, you know, going out. So it'll be back. But as I said, the pandemic has made people realize how important live music is.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's just jonesing for it, you know? Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. It was fantastic talking with you. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you maybe in Vegas with Aerosmith or at a AC/DC show in the next year.
Oh, I guarantee it'll happen, and it will be out. I guarantee it.
Great.
I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Okay. Take care, Cosmo.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.